Welcome everybody. I'm glad to see so many red sweaters. As you were told, my name is Herbert Murez. I don't care how you pronounce it, I'm not sensitive about it. And I was born on July 2nd, 1923 in Vienna, which at the time was the capital of Austria and is again the capital of Austria now. And that's where I grew up. Austria at the time that I was growing up was a country in difficult circumstances because before World War I, it was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included some 12 or 13 nationalities, and they all went, as a result of World War I and the peace treaty at the end of it, they all went their separate ways and had their own states. So Austria was left with a small base, probably not enough to sustain an economy, and times were tough. So that contributed to the general dissatisfaction with the situation. Anyway, I'll tell you, I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents had started one shoe store, then a second one, then a third one, and then they've consolidated them all into one real big store. And if anybody is interested, I have a photograph here and I can let you look at it, but it doesn't really add anything to the story. And my success in school was pretty middling. I did enough work to get by. That was a problem because I can tell you, you're very fortunate for the type of school system that you're growing up in, because you are being taught, you're being encouraged to develop the ability to think independently, to think for yourself. Not so the system that I grew up in. They expected you to assimilate a vast amount of data, but don't think for yourself. Just follow the party line, and just don't ask too many questions. And I was an avid questioner, so that made me very unpopular with the school staff. Anyway, to make a long story short, you probably know that Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, and Hitler at the time faithfully promised the president of Germany, the former Field Marshal Hindenburg, and who was a very respected person. He promised him faithfully he would govern by strictly democratic principles. And that promise was broken as soon as it was made, because Hitler just started to unravel all the democratic features in Germany. And of course, it was a rabid anti-Semitism, and the Nazi Party practiced that, and they capitalized on the tendency at least many of us have, of trying to blame somebody else for your problems, rather than to face them. So Hitler told the German people that it wasn't their fault that they lost the war, it was all the fault of the Jews. They sold them out. There's no historical support for that at all, but if you tell the story long enough and loud enough, a lot of people will buy it and believe it. That's a fact. I mean, truth is what people believe ultimately. Anyway, in neighboring Austria, we could see the development of the thought of Austria being annexed was unthinkable. In the meantime, of course, the Nazis in Austria did their groundwork and trying to undermine the government and to be in a position to take control. And so in 1938, things came to a head. And the Chancellor of Austria, his name was Schuschnigg, I don't expect you to pronounce it, called for a plebiscite. And Germany would not allow that plebiscite to occur. They sent their troops in. And I remember, I saw it myself. I remember the German army coming into Vienna. They came on trucks, and along the truck bed on each side, on the long side, there were benches, and the troops were sitting on those benches with their steel helmets and the rifles and the bayonets and the rifles and it. And you want to, I saw it with my own eyes. People were standing on the street about as deep as the sidewalk, and they cheered because they thought things will get better. They found out. Anyway, in Germany, the persecution of Jews and others who didn't approve of the Nazi regime started gradually and built up to an escalated level by 1938. But when Germany took over Austria, they immediately brought everything up to the level that existed in Germany, and the persecution was severe. Now, for one thing, and this affected me personally, as I said, the Anschluss, what they call the annexation, occurred in 1938, and about 6 weeks later, by May, all Jews were thrown out of school. Didn't matter what grade you were in, whether you were in grade 1 or 12 or university or whatever, all Jews were thrown out of school. And it certainly affected my family. I had an older brother, and he, of course, was thrown out of school too. And my parents, as I said, they had the big shoe store. And this event caused my father to have a nervous breakdown, and he became totally unfunctional. Just couldn't function anymore. And my mother had to take over, and she did, and she kept us alive. My mother, well, I'll get to that. Anyway, speaking of the shoe store, the first thing that the Nazis did is they sent some people out to smear up the windows with white paint and write Jew on Jew on the windows, just to warn everybody that it's a Jewish store and they shouldn't patronize it. The next thing is, that wasn't quite enough, so they put a guard in front of the door so nobody can go in. And then the Nazis appointed somebody that they called the commissar, a commissioner, whose job it was to see to it that my parents couldn't take anything out of the store. No money, no shoes, no furniture, nothing. No equipment, nothing. And then the Nazi Party appointed somebody whom they thought to be deserving to be the purchaser of the store. And this was officially approved. And he became the purchaser of the stores. And the purchase price was set at approximately 4 to 5% of what it was worth. And that wasn't paid in cash. No, that was paid in installments. And it wasn't paid in my parents' hands. It was paid into an account that was blocked, for which they were not allowed to make any withdrawals. And then, a little later on, they levied a fine on the account that wiped it out. So, with a complicated, pretended legal process, it was confiscation, pure and simple. Well, everything that they worked for and had accumulated was taken from them. And seeing the situation and what existed and what was happening, it was obvious that there was no future in Austria for any Jewish person. And we were faced thus with two choices. First of all, how do you get out? And second, where can you get in? The second question was probably the most burning one, because the countries, most of the European countries, and actually most countries in the world, said, well, we feel very sorry for the persecuted people, but we have an unemployment problem of our own. We cannot take in any refugees. We cannot take in anybody, so pass us this time. And the United States had an immigration law at the time, which I will describe briefly because it is important. There was an overall number of immigrants that were allowed each year. So many and no more. This was the time before people would just walk across a border or sneak across at night. That was not the time, nor the opportunity. For one thing, there was a big ocean in between. This overall number of allowed immigrants was divided into individual quotas for each country according to where an intended immigrant was born. So these quotas were not equal, but they were set in proportion to what the profile of the American population was at the time. And of course, the largest body of people in the United States at that time came from Anglo-Saxon countries, England, Ireland, and similar countries. Some Western Europe ones, French, and so forth. The quota from Eastern Europe, they were smaller because there was a smaller proportion of people coming from Eastern Europe that became citizens of the United States. So anyway, my mother saw to it that we went, my brother and I, and she also, of course, and my father, went to the American consul and registered immediately so that you get in line for your quota number. And we didn't know whether we'd go to the United States or any other place or however you get out, but you start to look for where can you get out. And with much effort, I'm not going into the details here, but with very much effort, we located a distant relative in Los Angeles who was willing to make it possible for us to get out. And to do that, he had to sign an affidavit that he would be responsible that we don't become public charges. So the government wasn't going to offer free hospitalization or care or anything of that kind. It was his responsibility, and he undertook it. And that is how my brother and I ultimately got out. Anyway, I'll take you back to an experience that I had in about November of 1938. There was an event that occurred in Paris where a man, certainly a very demented person, took a pot shot at a third secretary of the German embassy. Didn't hurt him very much. It was a superficial injury, but the Germans used it to drum up what appeared to be public outrage. And that became, you may have heard about it and read about it, that became known as the Night of the Broken Glass, where during the night, bands of people, Nazis, and everybody. They smashed windows of Jewish stores. They set fire to Jewish property, burned synagogues, and made all kinds of mischief. And much later on, I personally saw with my own eyes orders written by high government functionaries to the fire department not to put out any of the fires, just protect adjacent property. Let them burn to the ground, it said. And that's the way it went. Anyway, that morning, I didn't know what was going on. And I went to an office in the old part of Vienna. It was my job to run around and get all the papers and certifications that you needed. And then, so I went to that office to get some certification done. And normally there were a lot of people milling around in the street. And the street was about as wide as an alley, and not a very wide alley, just about an alley that one car could drive through in one direction. That's all. Anyway, by the time I saw, I was already in there, and there was an SS guard standing at the entry. And that SS guard, you should see him in the black uniform and the high boots and the red armband with the swastika on it, and the cap with the swastika on it, and the dead head. So I didn't feel so good about that. But as I said, I was there. So to see what was going on, I asked him, "Excuse me, sir, where is this office?" And he didn't answer me directly, but he says, "How old are you?" That didn't make me feel any better. And I was 14 at the time, and I said 13, because they weren't going after the kids, the youngsters at the time, so I made myself a year younger. I thought I could get away with that. And just about at that time, somebody called out to the SS man, and he turned his head to the other way. And I cannot tell you that this was a volitional act or something that I had thought out, but instinctively I started to run away. And I ran through the cornered streets and hid in them until I ran out, until my breath gave out. And I ducked into a doorway, and I looked around, and nobody was following me. So then I very quietly through side streets made my way back home. And I found out later that people who they held there were sent to the Dachau concentration camp, and most of them never came back. So I had my escape. I didn't know it at the time, but my instincts told me to run, and I ran like I could. And finally, in about March of 1939, my quota number came up, and I was ready to leave. And my parents were not ready yet because their quotas were not coming up yet. But anyway, so when I had all my visa ready from the American consulate, my mother took me to the train station, and God bless her memory, she made it like I was going off on a summer camp someplace. And the expectation was that we might never see each other again. But she put me on the train, and I had my suitcase. I had one suitcase that was all that was allowed, with clothing, and there was nothing of any value in there because that was not allowed. Just clothing and personal effects. And I was riding on the train, and the train eventually came to the German border with Holland, and the German guard came in, again with their red armband and the swastika on it, and they were very unfriendly, to say the least. Let's see your papers. So they take my papers, wait, we'll be back. I waited, and I waited. It took about 20 minutes, and those were the longest 20 minutes in my life that I experienced. And finally came back and said, okay, you can go. So they looked at my suitcase and just dumped everything out, pushed it around. Nan, go ahead, put it back. I put my clothes back, and my mother had packed it so beautifully, everything so neat, and it was all messed up, but I got it back into the suitcase, and the train went a few yards, and then the Dutch border guard came in, and they simply asked, did the Germans pass you? Yes. You're okay then, go ahead. And but then the train actually pulled off to a siding by a dock. And I just took my suitcase and walked from the train to the ship, the SS Penland. It was a small ship, about 10,000 tons, which is a small ship, or an ocean-going ship. And it took 10 days to cross the Atlantic. And the ship pulled into New York Harbor, and I went through Ellis Island, and Ellis Island is a very fabled place through which millions of immigrants came, and I was one of them, because then they just looked at me, hey, where are your papers? Okay, I'll stamp them, you're okay now. And do you have any tuberculosis? No, no thank. That was the only question they ever asked me, and I was. We had a very distant relative, an old lady who lived in the basement apartment, and she put me up on her couch for a couple of days, and then I got on a Greyhound bus and traveled to Los Angeles across country. It took 5 days. And I didn't know what was involved in traveling on a Greyhound bus and all that. And along the way, I picked up a little fruit here and there when the bus stopped, and that's how I made it for 5 days. Anyway, I came to Los Angeles, and my uncle put me to work. He had a garment factory at the time, and I was not quite 15, but I should have gone to school, but things were not all that well policed at the time about school attendance as it is now. So he put me to work in the shipping department and delivering packages to the department stores, and he paid me $10 a week, which was a going wage at the time for what I was doing, and he took out $5 for room and board. And I'm very thankful to this day that he took that $5 , because at least I knew I wasn't taking charity. I felt I was paying my way. So gradually I learned something about the garment business and got a better job. Anyway, I will fast forward now, skip a lot of in between, and tell you what happened when I got into the U.S. Army. At first, after Pearl Harbor, at first they didn't want me because they say you got flat feet. Second time, no, flat feet. The third time, it seems that the feet got better in the meantime, so they weren't so flat anymore. And they kept me and sent me to the Signal Corps in Camp Crowder in Missouri for basic training. And one fine day, the company clerk called me out, Murez, come on down to the office. So I went down to the office, and there was a truck waiting with about 2 or 3 other people, and the truck took me down to the courthouse in Neosho, Missouri. Went before the judge, the judge says, raise your right hand. So I raised my right hand. Congratulations, now you're a citizen. And I was in my fatigues, dirty, unkempt, you know, just coming off military training. And my naturalization certificate has that picture on me with the dirty fatigues and unkempt. But I'm very proud of that paper, and I guard it very zealously. Anyway, back to the company in Missouri. Again, Murez, come on down to the company office. So I came down. Okay, you're being transferred to Camp Ritchie in Maryland. Pack your stuff. So Camp Ritchie was the intelligence school. And if you're familiar with the word intelligence, particularly military intelligence, it's not an oxymoron. It's not quite. The term is used in a more ancient meaning information, particularly information about an adversary. So I went to Camp Ritchie in Maryland, and they put me into a school to learn all about the structure, organization of the German government, the German army. Everything that we knew about the adversary was being taught for the purpose of being able to interrogate prisoners of war and to analyze documents and extract any military information from them that is of any potential value. So it was a crowd of people, not typical. The first requirement to be in that school was to be fluent in German. And not too many people passed that to begin with. But aside from that, there were people who were international gamblers and people who had always lived in Europe, whatever. Anyway, so I went through that school, and I had one interesting experience, which I will tell you, because it'll tell you something. The Army at that time had a practice of trying to identify the coming leaders, the people who were marked for advancement into the general staff and the leadership of the Army. And one such colonel was sitting next to me in the school. He had been sent over from Fort Benning in Georgia, which was a general staff school. And I was filling out my paper, and the colonel just looked over my shoulder and filled out his paper. So, I mean, this sort of thing wouldn't normally go. But the sergeant, who was the instructor, was very wise to the ways of the Army. He couldn't see anything. So the colonel copied my paper, and he did very well, as did I. Anyway, I finally graduated from that school, and they shipped me overseas. I went on a ship that at peacetime was the SS Normandy, which was the French equivalent to the Queen Mary. They got the Queen Mary anchored in Long Beach, so all that's left of it. So it was a ship of that caliber, of that kind. And, the ship did not travel in convoys because it relied on speed. It could outrun any U-boat. On the way over to Europe, I stood on the back deck, and I saw suddenly, hey, we're going in the wrong direction. That ship is traveling in a westbound direction. You look at the clock, and at the sun, and you know what's going on. Well, I found out later from one of the crew that they got a U-boat warning, so they doubled back and finally made it into into Edinburgh, in Scotland. Originally, the ship was supposed to have docked in Brighton, in the southern part of England. Anyway, then we traveled by train through England from Scotland down to Brighton, and I got on a ship that was probably already ancient in the days of Lord Nelson. It was an old hog, and it was emptied out just to be the troop carrier, and there was the layer and layer and layer of bunks, about 12 layers done into the hold of the ship. And there was one thin steel ladder that went down. That's all there was no more. And I didn't like the looks of that, because this is not very confidence inspiring if that ship gets torpedoed, if something goes wrong anyway. So that night I sort of snuck away and I tried to sleep in one of the lifeboats, except that it was much too cold. I've never been so cold in my life, and I hope I'll never be so cold again. But anyway, the ship docked in Le Havre, which our troops had just liberated, and eventually the group that I traveled with made it into Paris, and at that point the war in Europe ended. And I had an experience the likes of which I don't ever expect to see again. There was jubilation in the streets. People were going on in the streets, they were dancing in the streets, and wherever you looked, somebody showed up with an accordion. You know, these things with the bellows that you pump? Made a little music and people were dancing. And if you wore an American uniform, you were most welcome. You were treated very kindly by the population that brought you wine and whatever. So anyway, I was pulled out of the group at that time to go on a little errand to a place in Saxony where we had 2 jeeploads of people. We went deep into Saxony, which was occupied by the Third Army, but under the agreement with the Russians was to become occupied by Russians. So our job was to retrieve some plans from one of the factories that the Germans kept inside of a mountain. So we picked those up and took them back. I didn't know at the time, but I found out afterwards what it was. They were the plans for the V2 rockets. If you know, you may or may not know, so I'll tell you, the V2 rockets was something that the Germans devised in the closing days of the war, that they could shoot rockets from up to over England and even Scotland, and hit a designated target. They were way ahead, when it came rocketry, they were way ahead of us or of anybody else. And if they had had enough of those, and if I had them early enough, the outcome of the war might have been different. But as it was, our Air Force was interested in getting those plants, so we salvaged them. And then finally I was assigned to a unit in Germany as part of the occupation army. And the job of that unit was to analyze captured papers, captured documents, German army, German government, and separate the wheat from the chaff, to look for something that has possible value or interest to our State Department or to any other allied government, and to abstract those things and to circulate it among the occupying powers. So I had the job of overseeing part of the reconstruction of the records of the Nazi Party, because in the closing days of the war, the the Germans had dumped the records of the Nazi Party into an abandoned salt mine. Those records were file cards about this big, and our Navy divers retrieved them. How they did it, I don't know, but they did it. But they brought those records up, and they, of course, they were not alphabetized. They were all out of order. We had a crew of German workers who were sorting them under our supervision. We had to decipher them, and I also had the job of translating a lot of documents which today are of historical interest, notably field orders signed by Adolf Hitler himself with his signature. There was something very characteristic about those, because Adolf Hitler, anything that required his signature, he wanted typed on a typewriter that printed very large letters, because he was vain. He needed glasses, but he didn't want to be seen or photographed wearing glasses. And so these were very outstanding, just by physical appearance, outstanding papers. So I saw, for example, and I'll just pick one of them that was very meaningful to me, the field order for the reoccupation of the Rhineland. Now, you may know that World War I ended between the Allied powers in Germany through the Treaty of Versailles, and by that treaty, Germany was prohibited to keep troops in the Rhineland. They had to keep them away from the Rhineland, east of the Rhineland, and back some distance away from the French border. Anyway, Hitler didn't like that, and secretly had places prepared, garrisons within the Rhineland to be occupied by German troops. And one fine day, loaded a bunch of German troops onto buses, onto trucks, similar to the ones that I've described that went into Vienna. And they just rolled into the Rhineland until they went into their prepared garrisons. Well, needless to say, the French were outraged and they wanted to mobilize. But they didn't want to go it alone, so they wanted the English to go along. And England at the time had its own problems. They had very bad unemployment, and there were, I think, there was the time they had problems with the king that had to abdicate because he was married an American divorcee. Anyway, so the English wouldn't go, to simply say, we got a lot of problems of our own, and the war is over, let them have it. And so the French didn't do anything alone, and Hitler got away with it. And the interesting thing about that field order, which I translated into English, was that it contained a provision in the event any resistance is encountered on the part of French troops. You are not to engage in any military action, but to turn right around and go back whence you came. Now, there is a conclusion that I have drawn from that, and other things that I have observed, which is there was not a will on the part of the Allied countries to resist. And that showed, that was a signal for Adolf Hitler that he could disregard the rest of the Versailles Treaty and rearm and build his army and his air force that almost conquered all of Europe. But if it had been known at the time that any resistance would have reversed it, it would have reversed the course of history. And I asked myself, how is it that a people like the Germans, who were as advanced in all the sciences and arts as any people on the face of the earth, learned people who describe themselves as a country, as a people of thinkers and poets, and they had a disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes among the Germans for years and years. How could they degenerate into the brutality that is so undescribable? And I haven't found a good answer or it could be that particular people. So I came to the opinion that it can happen any place and anywhere if the conditions are right, as they were, for that to happen. And as a matter of fact, you probably know that during World War I, the Turks committed some genocide on the Armenian people, and they got away with it. The world cried crocodile's tears, but that's all that happened. So in 1933, a newspaper reporter asked Adolf Hitler, how do you expect to get away with all of this persecution? So Adolf Hitler answered, nobody talks about the Armenians anymore, nobody cares. And he was right. So the message that I got out of this is that evil has to be resisted. You cannot simply disregard it, because it won't go away by itself. So if you see anybody being bullied, help them, or get some help, or report it to somebody. And the same thing, even in the public life. Pretty soon, you will all register as voters. You're not so far away from being of 18 years. And all I can tell you is we are blessed in the United States beyond any measure in having the right to vote. And I will tell you something. Everybody in the United States votes. Everybody votes. But not everybody casts a ballot. Those who do not cast a ballot, they vote for bad government. They vote for unresponsive government. They vote even for corrupt government. They vote for backstretching and dysfunctional government. Read your voting materials. California has an especially good setup in which all the materials are, you don't even have to ask for them, they come to you in the mail. You get your booklets and read them, make up your own mind. Your school system teaches you how to think for yourself, so use what you've learned. And the most important thing is, don't go for slogans. The slogan is only the label on the bottle. The slogan, or something like that, can be very misleading. I don't say that it is at any given point, but it may be. And it doesn't convey anything. That's a catchphrase, that's all. So read your materials, make up your own mind, and how you want your government to function, because it still is up to you. And anyway, so much for that. As an aside, eventually I came back to the United States, and there's one thing that you do more than anything else in the military. You wait. You wait for things to happen. And while some people use that waiting time either to drink beer or to gamble or whatever, I was a voracious reader. I read anything I could lay my hands on. And it served me, because eventually when I got back to the United States, the Veterans Administration at that point administered a test that you could take. It was a 3-day test, and they gave me the equivalent of 3 years of college, and that was enough for me to get into law school. So I went to law school, I became an attorney, I practiced law, and here I am, retired. And I've made it on time to still answer any questions that you have, and I will try to answer them. If you don't get to have your question answered, here's my email address. Send me an email, and I will be glad to answer it. Just give me about a day or two.
All right, I've got the microphone so that Herb can hear questions.
You were a Richie boy? You were a Richie boy? Sir, you were a Richie boy?
I'm sorry?
You were a Richie boy?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a book written about the Richie boys. It is an incredible book. Sir, I am so honored to be in your presence today, and thank you for your service. This man is a hero, ladies and gentlemen.
I got to be one of the riches. And Michigan, Maryland.
Okay, anybody have a question? I have a question.
Okay.
Herb, where did you learn to speak English? Were you taught in Austria, or did you learn to speak when you came back to America?
I had learned enough English in Austria to be able to carry on a conversation. And when I came to the United States gradually, you pick it up. I mean, that's, you know, it's like if you're in the water, you learn how to swim. But this is typical that even before
Yep, no, I'm still listening.
okay,
Sorry. I'm sorry, you're saying even before?
I say even before the German annexation of Austria, I had learned some English, and they started to teach English in what was the equivalent of the 5th grade. And when I was thrown out of school, I was in the equivalent of the 9th grade. When I refer to the grades, that only gives you the equivalent to what you would experience. But the learning process was not similar.
Thank you. All right, we got another question over here.
How old were you when you went into the military?
About 21.
How old were you at the time you entered law school?
I went into law school, I think I was about 28 or 29.
What's a Richie boy?
Yeah, he was a Richie boy.
What is a Richie boy?
A Richie boy is named after Camp Ritchie in Maryland. It's in the western part of Maryland, up in the hills, and it was the intelligence school of the U.S. Army during World War II.
Oh, thank you. Okay, over here.
Do you know what happened to your family?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you know what happened to the rest of your family, your parents?
Oh, I mean the rest of my family?
Yes.
Well, okay. My brother made it out at about maybe a month before me. And my parents had to wait. And they finally managed to get out. In a few days before the door was shut, they could still get a flight to England. And at that time, there was a short window of a few months before the start of World War II, when England allowed people to come in that had in America that were waiting to emigrate to the United States, but whose quota number wasn't out yet. And they allowed these people in that situation to come in, but not to work. They had to be supported by the Jewish community in England, and my parents made it out, and they were supported frugally by the Jewish community in England, and needless to say that whatever they got was repaid, fully repaid. I'm glad to tell you.
All right, so some more hands.
But I had a whole lot of uncles and aunts and cousins and nephews and nieces, and they were all murdered.
How old were you when you got out of school or got kicked out?
I'm sorry?
How old were you when you got kicked out of school?
I was in the equivalent, I was about between 13 and 14 when I was thrown out of school.
Okay, any other?
Did you ever see your family again?
Did I see whom again?
Did you ever see your parents again?
Oh, yes. My parents eventually made it, as I said, into the stopover in England. And actually, first my mother came and then my father did, as soon as they could. They already came when the war was going on, but there was a lull of a few months at the beginning of the war, as you may be aware, before actually Norway and then France was invaded. So they did manage it, but as I said, my collateral relatives, of which I had a whole tassel, they were all murdered.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, any other questions for her? Oh, okay.
Do you see any similarities with the actions of the Nazis and the actions of the Khmer Rouge?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you see any similarities with the Nazis and the Khmer Rouge? Sorry. Do you see any similarities with the actions of the Nazis and the actions of the Khmer Rouge?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, I mean, any kind of intolerance is an intolerance and takes it out on somebody who is expected to be weaker and defenseless. But persecution is all of one piece. And eventually, the bottom line is that none of us are safe unless all of us are safe.
All right, we are nearing our time.
Thank you, you're a wonderful audience.
So, on behalf of Rogers, we want to say thank you so much for coming and giving us this amazing opportunity.
Very was very glad to do it.
This is a small token of our appreciation for you.
Oh, thank you. What is it? It's not so small. That's some nice things here.
So you remember Rogers, our Rogers family, and I know that we will always remember this just as an experience to share with us. We're so grateful and thankful.